Hey everybody. So I got a really interesting question. Something worth talking about and discussing on the channel. Somebody asked me for a more in-depth commentary on my thoughts about Candace Owens because in the past, for example, I called her trash when she went on the Dave Rubin podcast or YouTube channel, and she was supposed to debate Blair White. And the very first thing she did, the first words out of her mouth were to inform the viewers that Blair White was actually a man and that this was a man she was talking to. That is a very insipid and trashy thing to do. And no matter what your opinion about the reality of people's gender identity and chosen gender identity is, that is absolutely unacceptable behavior. That was bullying. It was not fair, and it was very clearly intended to throw Blair White off her game as she was sitting down for this debate that she was supposed to have. So that is very shitty, trashy behavior. And when she does things like that, that's totally unacceptable. And I've said other things that I think she's disingenuous. I have actually called her mental health into question. I want to say I don't, when I call her mental health into question, I do not say that lightly. I'm not saying that to be funny. I'm saying that from the position of someone who has his own mental health issues and has seen things in her in her behavior that sound alarm bells in my mind about what might be going on. So I say that out of genuine concern, not trying to put her down or otherize her, I guess is the expression we use now. So this is a good discussion to have. And the person was asking me, in the context of the question, they were saying, did I think that Candace Owens had started out strong with good ideas and drifted off into just standard boilerplate GOP nonsense? And there's some layers to that I want to get into. But the first thing I want to clarify, by the way, my name is Jordan Owen. Notice what happens at the end of that. Jordan Owen. When we hear the N in Owen, we are then released into a glorious realm of silence, devoid of any consonant plurality. In other words, there is no S in my name, and there is no S at the end of my name. I understand if you are a troll that's trying to be a pain in the ass, why you would do it. But if you're a benevolent, kind-hearted, well-meaning, and genuine listener of the channel, please realize there's no S at the end of Jordan Owen. I bring this up because I can remember being in second grade and my boneheaded teacher correcting me multiple times, over and over again, about the spelling of my own name, because she could not understand that there's no S on the end of Owen. It's an ongoing thing. I have corrected people to their faces about that, and then they go right on using the S again in the same conversation. It's extraordinary. I bring that up because I'm talking about Candace Owens, so it bears pointing out. But yeah, the Owens spelling with an S is actually extraordinarily uncommon. It's virtually unheard of. But for some reason, it's kind of like when someone's last name is Roger and people have to call it Rogers, which that at least makes sense because you have Fred Rogers, the children's entertainer. At least then there's a common cultural reference point. But good Lord, man, Owen. That's it. Anyway, so talking about Candace Owens, do I think that she had good points and drifted off into ridiculous conservative nonsense? By the way, I've heard Candace Owens described as a far-right commentator. That is not an accurate descriptor at all. I get so tired of, hearing far-right, the term far-right used to discredit people whose politics are not anywhere close to that. The far right is the Proud Boys and the neo Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan and hate groups, active organized hate groups, that sort of thing. That's the far right. I've heard Larry Elder described as far right. That's absolutely ridiculous. They are, these people are, they are right wing, they are conservative, they are kind of standard GOP Republicans, but far right is a very different thing. And if you want to be taken seriously in the realm of discussion, it's worth acknowledging what people's actual positions are rather than just trying to discredit them by saying far right or far left or something like that. So anyway, getting back to Candace Owens. So what you have to understand about her, I don't think she started from a good place. I don't think she started out making good points. So the origin of Candace Owens is that when she was a teenager, she was very severely bullied in a very overtly and obviously and brazenly racist way by 3 white boys at her school. Now, certainly, everybody gets some teasing in high school. That's kind of part of the experience, mainly because you're dealing with immature people that are still trying to figure life out on their own. Or figure life out themselves. So that's part of it. But by the time you're in high school, the 3 white boys in question should have certainly known and understood that leveling racist harassment against a black girl that included violent threats, that is completely unacceptable. So Candace Owens' family sued the school and won. And good for them. They should have. They absolutely should have. And there needs to be a lot more of that. And I do think there needs to be a lot more of parents leveling lawsuits at the schools for bullying. I really do think that because the schools need to do a better job of curbing bullying. Obviously, something like that, you're never going to get it down to 0 because there will always be, first-time offenders. But the schools need to do a better job of dealing with that. And I say that as someone that was heavily bullied in school, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But from that experience, as a young adult, what Candace Owens wanted to do was launch a website called Social Autopsy. And the concept behind Social Autopsy was that if somebody was bullying, if one kid was bullying, and bear in mind her model for this was children mistreating other children, that they would be publicly shamed this way. That if one child or one young person was bullying another young person, a profile would be created for them on Social Autopsy, which would detail who they were, their names, their real names, anything that they had done. Behind a screen name, there would be, some degree of forensic analysis that would reveal who they actually were. And all of this would be logged and documented on socialautopsy.com, and that this was supposed to dissuade bullying. So this came out at the height of the Gamergate controversy, and amazingly, people on both sides of Gamergate decried it as being a horrible idea. And if you can get if you were able to get both sides of Gamergate to agree that something was a bad idea, that's pretty damn significant. So, the thing is, and I don't agree with the social autopsy idea either, simply for a couple of reasons. Simply, one, because I don't think that the way to deal with bullying is to become a bigger bully. You need to stand up for yourself, and you need to not take crap from people, learn to not take crap from people. But that is not something that countering bullying with bullying is not something I agree with. My granddad, he's no longer with us, love the man, miss him, but his opinion about bullies was something I don't agree with, which was, he said, if somebody's bullying you at school, what you do is you beat the living hell out of them every single time you see them until they're too scared of you to be anywhere near you. I don't agree with that idea. The ideal resolution is a resolution where we all learn to get along. I don't believe in countering bullying with bullying, and I don't agree with countering cyberbullying with more bullying. Now, I talked about my own experiences with bullying, and I can, while certainly I will never know what it is like to be a black person on the receiving end of racist mistreatment from white people, I'll never truly have that experience. Um, Certainly I can have an empathetic proxy appreciation of it and sympathy towards it. I have been harassed by the very kind of bullies that would have been harassing and mistreating Candace Owens, because I went during my schooling years. I lived in for an extended period of time in Mississippi, and I know what it's like to be harassed that way, because my experience, certainly I'm sure I was shielded to some degree by being white, but what happened was, when I got to Mississippi, I could not, I did not know at the time that I was autistic, that I was on the autism spectrum, that I had what we would now call Asperger's syndrome. I did not. I did not know that at the time, and certainly none of my classmates knew that at the time. But the way they understood my odd, eccentric behavior was to assume that I was gay. And, when you're a teenager and you're growing up, gay becomes kind of this universal catch-all for odd behavior and that sort of thing. Or at least it did. I mean, I haven't been a teenager in decades. But the... But anyway, so what happened was the kids at my school went home and told all their parents and their older siblings and everything that a fag had moved into their community. And and I know that such language is frowned upon in the in the realm of YouTube discussion, but I feel like I need to say it so that you can better appreciate the sting of what I'm talking about. And they understood it as, a fag had moved into their community. And so the bullying that I encountered was not just harassment from, insults from local kids. It was stuff more akin to what you see in like a movie like American History X or something like that. And it was very profoundly traumatizing, and it left me with scars that I'm still working through to this day. And here's why I bring this up. Because the thing about social autopsy is there's a part of me that understands the appeal of something like that. I'll give you an example. There was a boy, there were a couple of, the two of the main boys that kind of led the charge of harassing me when I was living in Mississippi. They both had this thing where they would beat up any girl that talked to me or that I talked to. I'm 6'2" now, and I've been 6'2" since I was about 11, 12 years old. So they were a little reticent about attacking me directly. But what they would do is they would beat up any girl that was they saw in conversation with me. At one point, and this was when I was in high school, and this was at the height of the Jonesboro Columbine school shooting controversies. One of those two boys found out that I had asked out one of what he called his hoes. These were white boys, by the way. That I had asked out or made some kind of romantic overture to one of the women that he determined to be one of his hoes, one of the women that he would beat up for talking to me. He stood up in front of the classroom and described to the classroom, to the hearing of a room full of witnesses, he told them that he was going to kill me. In all seriousness, in anger, in vicious anger, the kind of anger that if you saw it would make you afraid for your immediate safety. He said that he was going to kill me. He described in detail the weapon he was going to use, which was going to be a shotgun owned by his family. He described in detail the weapon he would use. He described when and where he was going to do it, and made sure I knew on no uncertain terms that he was coming to kill me for fucking with his hose. My parents got in touch with the school, and the school really didn't do a whole lot. They just kind of let that one slide. The reason being that, in small town Mississippi, if you're a white boy that wears corduroy slacks, penny loafers, and a pink polo shirt, a polo player t-shirt to school, you can pretty much get away with anything. And I have seen a preppy hillbilly redneck threaten my life to my face on no uncertain terms and not get punished. There's a lot more to that story, but we're talking about Candace Owens. Anyway, or not face any significant punishment. I think he got a stern talking to. But anyway, the point being, I know who that guy is, and if I go check in on him on social media, he's now a thriving, happy family man. He's got children of his own. He's got a beautiful wife. He's got, he's got a job that's, pays him well. He's living his best life, and I see periodically, if I go on social media, mutual friends will post pictures with him in them and everything. And I think about it. I think about how I would love for the whole fucking world to know what that guy is really like, what that guy did to me. And that was not the only thing that guy did. I don't want to talk about it more than I want to get off on that subject. We're here to talk about Candace Owens. That guy terrorized me. We should have sued the school for allowing that shit to happen. We really should have. The point I'm bringing up is I know and I get on a real and visceral level how fucking satisfying it seems to want to take someone's behavior like that and slap it up on a website where everybody can know what a scumbag they are forever. I understand the desire to want to do that, because I have wanted to do that. I still feel the desire to want to do that, because it just fucking makes me sick that guy gets to go off and have a family and have children and have a wife and have a thriving job that's paying him well, while I'm sitting here almost 40 years old, still in therapy for the shit he put me through. So I know what it's like. I know what it's like to want to publicly decimate someone who does something like that to you. And bear in mind, if it had gotten to the point where we were filing criminal charges, certainly at that point his name needs to be out there in the public sphere and needs to be well known, because that's when we're talking about criminal behavior. Anyway, so I understand wanting to do that. I really do. I get it. I get why on a visceral level she would want to do that. And I get why someone who is recovering from the trauma of being bullied, not just being bullied, but going to that further degree of being bullied on the basis of prejudice and bigotry and hatred. I get that. I really do. And I also feel like that's really, really getting at the heart of the problem with Candace Owens. And that's one of the reasons I've talked about why, I'm sorry, I do this periodically because I have chronic issues in this shoulder from 25 years of playing the guitar, and I just got done at the gym, so this always acts up when I've been working out. Anyway, so I understand that, and I really think that gets at the heart of Candace Owens, because I really feel like I'm someone who, when you're autistic, you have to learn a lot of things about empathy. It's not that you don't have empathy like a psychopath. You do have empathy. You just don't comprehend the signals that people are sending out that would cause you to feel empathy for them. So you have to learn it. It's a second language you have to learn. And so, in learning that, I feel a very strong pull of empathy towards Candace Owens when I think about the level of abuse and harassment that she encountered on that level, and so that is concerning to me. And then we bring it back around to the curious position about where she found herself in Gamergate, where both sides of Gamergate are saying this is a horrible idea. At that point, she went and she was contacted by Zoe Quinn. And I'm not going to do any commentary on Zoe Quinn here. This is a very old topic of discussion. I'm just bringing it up for the historicity of it. But anyway, she talked about, or the history of it, she talked about publicly about her experiences with Zoe Quinn, which were she had a very negative impression of Zoe Quinn, putting it as evenly as possible. She went on Joe Rogan and talked about her negative experiences with Zoe Quinn. Well, when you go on the show of someone like Joe Rogan and you speak negatively of someone like Zoe Quinn, that's a really great way to ingratiate yourself to one specific side of the whole Gamergate controversy. And consequently, a lot of right-wing people like Milo Yiannopoulos, like I believe Mike Cernovich, I think was one, that kind of thing, a lot of right-wing personalities started opening up to her. And I really do think that Candace Owens kind of sold her soul in a lot of ways. I think that she strikes me as someone whose opinions and ideas are not her own opinions. They're not her own ideas. She just sounds like she is regurgitating boilerplate what she thinks she ought to say to appeal to the kind of right-wing people that opened their doors to her. Because here's the thing. While I am someone who I consider myself a libertarian, a left-leaning libertarian at that, there are certainly a lot of ideas that I think that have benefited me and have influenced my worldview from all across the political spectrum, left and right of center. And I like to think that real maturity involves acknowledging that there can be good ideas from all across the board, and we need to think about and really take those ideas into play and into practice. And so I'm not going to just solely discredit or throw out an idea because it comes from a certain perspective or certain political alignment. But you have to remember, news outlets on the right, like Prager University, which brought PragerU, which brought Candace on board, like the Daily Wire, which currently has Candace on board, you have to remember that they love the idea of opening their doors to a black female conservative, because one of the number one accusations that they get made against them is that they are racist and sexist. And so what they can do is they can tokenize someone like Candace Owens and say, well, we can't be that because we have a black female woman delivering this part of the message that we want you to hear. That is what Candace Owens has become, and that is what she always has been. She is not someone who I have ever thought was espousing her own really deeply felt and cognitively reasoned and arrived at personal position. She strikes me as someone whose job is to get paid to stand up there and say certain talking points so that right-wing white male right-wing people in this country can say, no, it's okay, my black friend says this too. And that's what she is. She is this. She's a prop for taking the edge off of ideas that would sound potentially racist, or would get dismissed as racist and sexist if a white man was saying them. That's what she is, and I don't think she ever started from a good place in her commentary. She came to prominence on the basis of a totally ridiculous, terrible idea that should never have gotten even the small degree of traction that it did. And from there, she just went to whoever opened the door for her. And I really do think that I really do think that if left-wing news outlets and left-wing commentators had opened the door to her, she would be, she would have gone the direction of Joy Reid or something like that. So that really is my impression of her. That I think she's a lost soul, and I think she's always been a lost soul. And rather than find herself and find her own soul, she's just espousing viewpoints from people that would pay her, and she probably really does believe it. She's probably been waving that flag for so long that she really does think that these are sincerely held viewpoints of her own and everything. Now, the thing is, black conservative commentators are people that I do think we should listen to, because they stand at a very unique junction in the dialogue about race relations, especially between blacks and whites in the United States. People like Thomas Sowell, people like Larry Elder, people like Coleman Hughes, put a pin in his name because I'm going to come back to it. They have interesting points of view, and they are points of view that we need to listen to, because the black agenda for progress, the agenda for black progress in the United States is that's something that's entirely surrounded by a left-wing dialogue, and to the exclusion of the idea that there are black, more moderate and right-leaning blacks that actually would have something of value to contribute to that discussion. Now, I'll give you an example. Shelby Steele is a prominent black conservative leaning libertarian, I think is how he would describe himself. He has a book called White Guilt that's analyzing and discussing the phenomenon of white guilt. And it really is something that's worthy of reading, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. It's a fascinating look at the cultural phenomenon of white guilt. A very interesting point that he makes in the book is that he talks about a time he was a young liberal radical in the 60s and everything, when his point of view started to change about race relations and that sort of thing. And a very interesting topic of discussion he brings up is a time he was at a party in the 60s, and he ran into a guy that he had not seen in a while, an old white friend of his that he hadn't seen in a while. And this guy was a hippie and a very activist hippie type dude now. And he said, "Oh yeah, man, the civil rights, man, we're down with that. I'm down with that cause, man. I'm on board with this. Yeah, that's one of my things, man. I'm on board with this." And Shelby Steele said he realized in talking to this guy that this guy was actually not internalizing the black civil rights struggle from the correct perspective. This guy was somebody who got off on being a political activist, on marching and yelling at the man and challenging the man and all of that stuff, and he didn't really understand that the black struggle for civil rights was something removed from this white hippie liberal activist thing that was going on in the 60s, that Shelby Steele, was trying to tell a guy like, this isn't fun for me, right? This isn't some badass activist thing that I'm doing. This is a real struggle for civil rights. That's a good insight into the black struggle for civil rights, and distinguishing it as something unique from a lot of the progressive movements that have taken it on as an issue through the years, that it is something that exists independently of that and is ultimately something apolitical it's not something that belongs to the left or the right. It's its own unique issue. Okay, that's a great observation from a conservative-leaning black commentator. Those kind of observations don't usually come out from people on the left, so a lot of times black conservatives will have a lot of great gems to offer. In the contemporary discussion, all of those people I described, Larry Elder, Thomas Sowell, Shelby Steele, they're old dudes, they're old guys. So let's look at the young guard, the new vanguard, the young group of black conservatives that are coming out now. Candace Owens is ultimately an Uncle Tom. That's what she sounds like to me. Coleman Hughes, by contrast, is a very different person, a very different personality. And listen sometime to the discussions, the interviews that Candace Owens carries out, and the discussions and interviews that Candace Owens has, and the discussions and interviews that Coleman Hughes takes part in. Because what I see in the difference between these two young black conservatives is Candace Owens seems to just be bringing people on to reinforce existing GOP talking points. Like, one of the few Candace Owens interviews I've sat down and watched is the interview she did with Lila Rose from Live Action, who is an anti-abortion, pro-life activist, and Live Action is her group. Quickly speaking, Lila Rose is a duplicitous, deceitful scumbag. She goes beyond. It's not just that she disagrees with. It's not just that she disagrees with abortion access. She is a longtime disciple of and collaborator with James O'Keefe, the scam journalist who sets things up to make things look like what's not actually going on. She has done some of that herself, and she actually had to, because of a court injunction against one of her longtime collaborators, she actually had to remove a lot of stuff from the Live Action website. So she is not a good person at all. Wherever you stand on abortion, if you're pro-life, pick a different person from Lila Rose. She is a conniving she is a conniving bullshit artist and nothing else. Anyway, the interview that Candace Owens has with Lila Rose is it just comes off as, let's sit here with smiley faces, fake smiley faces, talking in perky voices, and say conservative things. The contrast that with someone like Coleman Hughes, who in his interviews, like recently I watched the interview he did with Helen Joyce, he is so thoughtful, and everything he is always saying sounds like he's thinking aloud. In all of his interviews, it feels like you have somebody who is actively considering what the person they're talking to is saying, and actively incorporating that into an ongoing thought process that they are having. That is the difference, and that is why Coleman Hughes sounds insightful, because he, as opposed to just sounding like an Uncle Tom, somebody that's supposed to make right-wing media outlets sound less racist because they're black, because they've been tokenized. He actually sounds like someone who is thinking about new ideas that he's hearing, incorporating them into an existing bulwark of personal perspective that he's developed over time, and actually actively engaging. And that's the thing. That's the difference. It's not, yes, he is a conservative-leaning person, but he is a thoughtful person who you can tell is actively considering the point of view that he's presenting and that he's discussing with his guests on his show, as opposed to someone like Candace Owens, who just sounds fake. I mean, that is the number one thing I would say about her, that she is fake. And one of the things that's that she did that was very controversial was when the George Floyd thing happened. Now you have to remember, when George Floyd first happened, when that incident first happened, the country was fucking united on that shit. Before people started going off into their own corners about the larger issue, the larger discussion about race relations as it relates to the police in this country, people were fucking united on the side of George Floyd. And if you need, I tweeted this back when it happened, if you need any proof of how united people were, just look at the cartoons that Mike Lukovich and Ben Garrison put out, they both had the same opinion, that Derek Chauvin was a murderer. You think that is how united people that diametrically opposed were united about the Derek Chauvin murder of George Floyd. At that point, Candace Owens made a fool of herself by trying to sound profound. And the way she tried to sound profound was to quote Shelby Steele, who I mentioned earlier. Shelby Steele had pointed out in a previous essay, I believe that was released in relation to the Rodney King incident, had pointed out that the black community has a problem with championing and valorizing the lowest people in its ranks, criminal people who are criminals, drug abusers. I know that there are people who genuinely struggle with drug abuse, but it's one thing to struggle with it and one thing to applaud it and valorize it and that kind of thing. That, the black community has a problem with valorizing gang leaders and gangbangers and organized crime and things like that. And that is a very true and worthwhile thing to consider. And he's pointing out that that is an impediment to black excellence. And why is it that the black community is always exalting those people? She tried to trot out those arguments from Shelby Steele in relation to George Floyd, pointing out that George Floyd, as many people have pointed out, was on fentanyl when the incident happened, that the whole incident occurred because he was trying to pass a bad, I believe it wasn't a bad check, I believe he was trying to pass a bad counterfeit $20 bill or something like that. And so she was trying to make that argument. Now, Shelby Steele, in making that argument, was making a valid observation about a chronic issue that faces the black community. Certainly, rap and hip-hop culture has an element, has something to do with that, and that sort of thing. That is worth considering, and that is worth talking about. You could make a corollary point about how white culture has a problem with lifting up and valorizing redneck behavior and country bumpkin behavior, when white people rallied behind someone like George W. Bush and that kind of thing. So that's an argument that can be made all across the board. But when she brought that up in relation to George Floyd, that was absolutely sickening and disgusting. And there is no doubt in my mind that just like when she was bringing up she brought up the issue of Blair White's gender identity in that debate completely unnecessarily. There is no doubt in my mind that she was just trying to be a loudmouth asshole that was trying to defecate on the issue at hand to push the right-wing talking points that she was being fed. That is a very, very contemptible thing to do, what she did. Now, I want to clarify one other thing, by the way. I love Dave Chappelle. He's one of my favorite living comedians. But in one of his stand-up specials, Dave Chappelle said, because of what Candace Owens said, he said that he wanted to, and I don't like this, but I'm repeating it because it's what he said. He said that he wanted to kick her in her smelly pussy. Absolutely, completely unacceptable thing to say. That was totally uncalled for. He could have expressed that same level of outrage in a way that was not as menacing and threatening. At the same time, I say this in tandem with the fact that I also realize that what he was doing, his stand-up routine, is essentially an act of performance art, and he's trying to fully enunciate his honest feelings and everything. I do want to point out a piece of hypocrisy, though. Critics, people reviewing I read the reviews of that stand-up special on Netflix. I read the reviews that various news outlets were running about it and everything, and they all talked about how his choice of words was unfortunate and that sort of thing, and he could have picked some better wording when he said he wanted to kick her in her smelly pussy and all of that. That his choice of words was unfortunate, and they played it off that way. And I thought, motherfuckers, you know full well that if he had said that about a female left-leaning political commentator, you would be calling for his head, you would be calling for him to be canceled, there would be protests and riots in the street, you would be demanding that Netflix sever all ties and issue an apology, etc., etc. you know full well that's what your reaction would have been. And that level of hypocrisy just gets under my skin to no small degree. But anyway, so does Candace, so that's what it comes back to. Does Candace Owens have anything really worthwhile to offer? And I really don't think so. And like I said, I don't think she entered the discussion from the position of someone like Coleman Hughes, who was genuinely interested in learning and evolving his position over time. She just sounds like, it's just like, I feel like behind the scenes, she just says, what you want me to say today, Mrs. Shapiro, and she gets up there and says, whatever right-wing talking points she needs to try to soothe over by way of her black femaleness and everything. So for that reason, I just don't get a good perspective about her. And one thing to watch out for in terms of, whenever a new commentator of any political stripe or about any particular issue comes to light, the litmus test for whether or not they're serious in their point of view is going to be, or whether or not they're legitimate in their point of view and whether or not they're worthwhile to listen to. In my mind, the litmus test for that is, are they willing to take positions that are stridently opposed to the mainstream of opinion on the side of people who watch them and listen to them. So, for example, talking about another black conservative was Officer Tatum, I believe is his name, Officer Tatum. He was a voice, to some degree, a voice of sanity in the whole, blacks versus the police discussion, because he as a former police officer was able to speak to a lot of the bullshit that was going around about police officers, about how the police work and that kind of thing, and kind of dispel some bad information in that regard. He was good for that. But then I noticed that, but then I saw when the 2020 election happened, he jumped on they stole the election bandwagon. And I started watching him. What ultimately happened was he just started taking, because I think his bread and butter became right-wing talking points. So whatever the right-wing talking points were, that became what he tried to espouse. And so I stopped seeing him be a man of his own opinions and his own ideas that might happen to correlate with certain conservative ideas, and just becoming a man who was taking whatever opinion was within the mainstream of conservative thought at the time. The same thing was true of, what was that woman's name? She was a somewhat heavy-set woman who she became alienated from left-wing politics because she was part of the knitting community, the sewing community online, and became heavily that community became heavily inundated with leftist politics, and her name was like Kermit or Kevin or something odd like that, for a woman to be named. And she was on PragerU for a little bit, and I think she appeared in some other places too. But anyway, she was much the same, where she went from having what seemed like a genuinely nuanced position, to just going hardline, whatever the mainstream of conservative thought was. That's what she got on board with. Contrast that with someone like, the recently popular Colonel Kurtz, who she has been commenting on the Marilyn Manson legal debacle. She previously commented on the Johnny Depp legal debacle. Since those two things were her position, her main talking points for a long time, you would be tempted to think that she was some kind of right-leaning, red pill kind of person or something like that. Well, recently she has come out as very pro-choice, and pro-choice, pro-abortion has become a campaigning position for her, and something she's talked about on social media, something she's talked about on her channel, and she has straight up said, this is an issue that matters to me. I don't care how many followers I lose as a result. That's somebody that's still thinking for themselves. That's somebody that has gained prominence but has not lost their soul. When you see somebody that is willing to hold on to issues that are personally important to them with that and not abandon those positions to chase after the mainstream of left-wing or right-wing political thought, that's when you're dealing with someone who's genuine. That is what we don't see from Candace Owens, and I don't think we're ever going to see it from Candace Owens. So anyway, I don't know how to end this video, but I have to pee really bad, so have a good night, people.